Hello friends, we are discussing the finer points of language and today we are studying its origin. The origin of language in the human species has been the topic of scholarly discussions for several centuries. In spite of this, there is no consensus on its ultimate origin or age. One problem that makes the topic difficult to study is the lack of direct evidence. Consequently, scholars wishing to study the origin of language must draw inferences from other kinds of evidence such as the fossil record or from archaeological evidence, from contemporary language diversity and from studies of language acquisition, from comparison between human language and the systems of communication existing among other animals, particularly other primates. It is generally agreed that the origin of language are closely tied to the origin of modern human behavior. This fact that empirical evidence is limited has led many scholars to regard the entire topic as unsuitable for serious study. In 1866, the Linguistic Society of Paris went so far as to ban debates on the subject, a prohibition which remained influential across much of the Western world until late in the 20th century. Today, there are numerous hypotheses about how, why, when and where language might have first emerged. Since the early 1990s, however, a growing number of professional linguists, archaeologists, psychologists, anthropologists and others have attempted to address with the new methods what they are beginning to consider the hardest problem in the science. Now we talk about approaches. Approaches to the origin of language can be divided according to their underlying assumptions. Continuity theories are based on the idea that language is so complex that one cannot imagine it simply appearing from nothing in its final form. It must have evolved from earlier pre-linguistic systems among our primate ancestors. Now, there is another type of theory which we call as discontinuity theories that are based on the opposite idea that language is a unique trait, so it cannot be compared to anything found among non-humans and must therefore have appeared fairly suddenly during the course of human evolution. Another contrast is between theories that see language mostly as an innate faculty that is largely genetically encoded and those that see it as a system that is mainly cultural, that is learned through social interaction. Noam Chomsky is a prominent proponent of discontinuity theory. He argues that a single chance mutation occurred in one individual on the order of 1 lakh years ago, triggering the instantaneous emergence of language faculty, that is a component of mind brain, in perfect or near perfect form. The philosophical argument runs briefly as follows. Firstly, from what is known about evolution, any biological change in a species arises by random genetical change in a single individual which spreads throughout its breeding group. Secondly, from a computational perspective on the theory of language, the only change that was needed was the cognitive ability to construct and process recursive data structures in the mind, that is the property of discrete infinity, which appears to be unique to the human mind. This genetical change, which endowed the human mind with the property of discrete infinity, Chomsky argues essentially amounts to a jump from being able to count up to n, where n is a fixed number, to being able to count indefinitely, that is, if n can be constructed, so can n plus 1. It follows from this assertion that the evolution of the human language faculty is saltational, since as a matter of logical fact, there is no way to gradually transit from a mind capable of counting up to a fixed number to a mind capable of counting indefinitely. The picture then, by loose analogy, is that the formation of the language faculty in humans is akin to the formation of a crystal. Discrete infinity was the seed crystal in a supersaturated primate brain on the verge of blossoming into the human mind by physical law, once a single small but crucial keystone was added by evolution. Continuity based theory are currently held by a majority of scholars, but they vary in how they envision this development. Among those who see language as being mostly innate, some notable like Steven Pinker avoid speculating about specific precursors in non-human primates, stressing simply that language faculty must have evolved in usual gradualistic way. Others in this intellectual camp, notably Ibn al-Baik, hold that language evolved not from primate communication but from primate cognition, which is significantly more complex. Those who see language as socially learned tool of communication such as Michael Tomasello see it developing from cognitively controlled aspects of primate communication, these being mostly gestural as opposed to vocal. Where vocal precursors are concerned, many continuity theorists envisage language evolving from early human capacities for song. Transcending the continuity versus discontinuity divide are those who view the emergence of language as the consequence of some kind of social transformation that, by generating unprecedented levels of public trust, liberated a genetical potential for linguistic creativity that had previously lain dormant. Ritual or speech co-evolution theory is an example of this approach. Scholars in this intellectual camp point to the fact that even chimpanzees and bonobos have latent symbolic capacities that in the wild they rarely, if ever, use. Because the emergence of language is located so far back in human prehistory, the relevant developments have left no direct historical traces, nor can comparable processes be observed today. Despite this, the emergence of new sign languages in modern times, like the Nicaraguan Sign Language, for example, might potentially offer insight into developmental stages and creative processes necessarily involved. Another approach has been to inspect early human fossils, looking for traces of physical adaptation to language use. In some cases, when the DNA of the extinct humans can be recovered, the presence or the absence of supposedly language relevant genes, FOXP2 is an example, might prove informative. The time range for this evolution of language and or its anatomical prerequisites extends, at least in principle, from the phylogenetical divergence of Homo, that is 2.3 to 2.4 million years ago, from Pan, that is 5 to 6 million years ago, to the emergence of full behavioral modernity some 1,50,000 or 50,000 years ago. Few dispute that Australopithecus probably lacked vocal communication significantly more sophisticated than that of great apes in general, but scholarly opinions vary as to the development since the appearance of Homo some 2.5 million years ago. Some scholars assume the development of primate language-like systems, that is proto-language, as early as Homo habilis, while others place the development of symbolic communication only with Homo erectus, that is 1.8 million years ago, and the development of language proper with Homo sapiens less than 2 lakhs years ago. Using statistical method to estimate the time required to achieve the current spread and diversity in modern languages today, Johanna Nicholas, a linguist at the University of California, Berkeley, argued in 1998 that vocal languages must have begun diversifying in our species at least 1 lakh years ago. Using phonemic diversity, a more recent analysis offer directly linguistic support from a similar date. Estimates of this kind are independently supported by genetical, archaeological, paleontological and much other evidence suggesting that language probably emerged somewhere in sub-Saharan African during the Middle Stone Age, roughly contemporaneous with the speciation of Homo sapiens. Linguists agree that apart from such thing as pidgins, there are no primate languages. All modern human populations speak languages of comparable expressive power, though much recent scholarship has explored how linguistic complexity varies between and within language over historical time. Now, there is a quote by Charles Darwin, and I quote, "I cannot doubt that language owes its origin to the imitation and modification aided by signs and gestures of various natural sounds, the voice of other animals and man's own instinctive cries." In 1861, historical linguist Max Muller published a list of speculative theories concerning the origins of spoken language. Now, this is called bow wow. The bow wow or the cuckoo theory, which Muller attributed to the German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder, saw early words as imitation of the cries of beasts and birds. The next is poo poo. The poo poo theory saw the first words as emotional interjections and exclamation triggered by a pain, pleasures, surprise, and so on. Now, another theory is ding dong. Max Muller suggested what he called the ding dong theory, which states that all things have a vibrating natural resonance echoed somehow by man in his earliest words. Another one is yo he ho. The yo he ho theory saw language emerging out of collective rhythmatic labor, the attempt to synchronize muscular effort resulting in sounds such as heave alternating with sounds such as ho. Now, another interesting one is ta-ta. This did not feature in the Max Muller list, having been proposed in 1930 by Sir Richard Paget. According to ta-ta theory, humans made the earliest words by tongue movements that mimicked manual gestures, rendering them audible. Most scholars today consider all such theories not so much wrong. The problem with these theories is that they are so narrowly mechanistic. They assume that once our ancestors had stumbled upon the appropriate ingenious mechanism of linking sounds with meaning, language automatically evolved and changed. Problem of reliability and deception. Now, from the perspective of modern science, the main obstacle to the evolution of language-like communication in nature, it is the fact that symbol and arbitrary association of sounds or other perceptible forms with corresponding meanings are unreliable and may well be false. As the saying goes, words are cheap. Animal vocal signals are for most part intrinsically reliable. When a cat purrs, the signal constitutes direct evidence of the animal's contented state. We can trust the signal not because the cat is inclined to be honest, but because it just can't fake that sound. Primate vocal calls may be slightly more manipulable, but they remain reliable for the same reason, because they are hard to fake. Primate social intelligence is Machiavellian, self-serving, and unconstrained by moral scruples. Monkeys and apes often attempt to deceive one another while at the same time remaining constantly on guard against falling victim to deception themselves. Paradoxically, it is precisely primates' resistance to deception that blocks the evolution of their signaling system along language-like lines. Language is ruled out because the best way to guard against being deceived is to ignore all signals except those that are instantly verifiable. words automatically fail this test. Now let's talk about mother tongue hypothesis. The mother tongue hypothesis was proposed in 2004 as a possible solution to this problem. W.T. Fitch suggested that Darwinian principle of kin selection, that is the convergence of genetical interest between relatives, might be part of the answer. Fitch suggests that languages were originally mother tongue. If language evolved initially for communication between mothers and their own biological offsprings, extended later to include adult relatives as well, the interests of speakers and listeners would have tended to coincide. Fitch argues that shared genetical interest would have led to sufficient trust and cooperation for intrinsically unreliable signals like words to become accepted as trustworthy, and so began evolving for the first time. Critics of this theory point out that kin selection is not unique to human. Ape mother also share genes with their offspring, as do all animals, so why it is only humans who speak? Furthermore, it is difficult to believe that early humans restricted linguistic communication to genetic kin. The incest taboo must have forced men and women to interact and communicate with non-kin. So even if we accept Fitch's initial premises, the extension of the posited mother tongue network from relatives to non-relatives remain unexplained. The obligatory reciprocal altruism hypothesis, Ulbricht, invokes another standard Darwinian principle, that is reciprocal altruism, to explain the unusually high levels of intentionally honesty necessary for language to evolve. Now, reciprocal altruism can be expressed as principle that if you scratch my back, I will scratch yours. In linguistic terms, it would mean that if you speak truthfully to me, I will speak truthfully to you. Ordinary Darwinian reciprocal altruism, Ulbricht point out, is a relationship established between frequently interacting individuals. For language to prevail across an entire community, however, the necessary reciprocity would have needed to be enforced universally instead of being led to individual choice. Ulbricht concluded that for language to evolve, early society as a whole must have been subject to moral regulation. Critics point out that this theory fails to explain when, how, why, or by whom obligatory reciprocal altruism could possibly have been enforced. Various proposals have been offered to remedy this defect. A further criticism is that language doesn't work on the basis of reciprocal altruism anyway. Humans in conversational groups don't withhold information to all except listeners likely to offer valuable information in return. On the contrary, they seem to want to advertise to the world their access to socially relevant information, broadcasting it to anyone who will listen without thought of return. Words are easy to fake. Should they turn out to be lies, listeners will adapt by ignoring them in favor of hard to fake indices. For language to work with, then listeners must be confident that those with whom they are on speaking terms are generally likely to be honest. A peculiar feature of language is displaced reference, which means reference to topics outside the currently perceptible situation. This property prevents utterances from being corroborated in the immediate here and now. For this reason, language presupposes relatively high levels of mutual trust in order to become established over time as an evolutionary stable strategy. A theory of origin of language must therefore explain why humans could begin trusting cheap signals in ways that other animals apparently cannot. I hope you will find this lecture very interesting and useful. Thank you so much for listening.